Okay, I want to welcome everyone to the inaugural Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Leadership Summit. We are so glad you could join us on this day of professional learning meant to take family school community partnership to the next level. My name is Hadley Bachman and I will be this session's moderator. The session is session number 6, Partnering with the Community to Strengthen Family School Relationships. If you have any questions, concerns, or technical issues, please message me privately in the chat. To ensure that we all get the most out of today, we are asking that all participants turn off their webcams and microphones. If you have questions for the presenter, please use the chat feature and I will pass them along at the appropriate time. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Be sure to use the hashtag #LeadTheLaunch to share your thoughts. Karen Stansberry Beard is an associate professor and Education Administration Program Chair and Educational Policy Affiliate at The Ohio State University. She researches educational administration and organizational leadership development, positive psychology and related constructs, flow and academic optimism, and policy implementation supportive of cross-cultural understanding and achievement gap reduction. Without further ado, Dr. Beard, we look forward to learning from you today.
Thank you, Hadley, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to be here and really participate in a different way in this conference. I've known about it, but I have not had the pleasure of being able to be part of it until now. So I'm really excited to share what my research has yielded over the past few years recently. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you a case study on engaging families and community from the perspective of a superintendent and his cabinet of principals, as well as some community leaders in the field. The district is still remaining anonymous and the study has been completed. We are finishing revisions for the publication and we expect that it should be out early spring, if not sooner. So the title of my presentation then is Partnering with the Community to Strengthen Family School Relations, Removing Barriers to Learning. And this was a case study that I conducted with an EDD student about 4 years ago now. Hadley? All right, the reason that I chose this particular district, and I can tell you that it's a district in California, but the reason that I chose this district is that it came up on my radar through my professional organization, the University Council of Education Administrators. As Hadley mentioned to you, my research involves education administration and the preparation of leaders, like principals and superintendents primarily, because I am a K-12 based educator. My first career, I say, really started in urban education where I taught and then became a principal for years. So that's really my, my wheelhouse. But since coming to Ohio State and learning more about research, I started delving into positive psychology. I'll just tell you a little bit more about that down the road. But this particular district came on the radar because of their achievement gains. And it is an urban district that's located in California. And I was very interested in how they were making such marked achievement gains. As you can see, Hadley, I might need you to point, because I'm pointing and I can see it, but I don't know if you can. But if you go over to SESD, on the first line, this is their ELA score from 2015, after they had put in about 2 years of focused work around partnerships and creating partnerships to benefit their achievement. So we looked at their ELA and then we also looked at their math. But what I want to point out, and the reason that this became so significant to me, was their high score paralleled with other SBAC states, which is the consortium that they use. Their other states, in comparison, they were way above their own, California, but the only one that ranked higher was Oregon. And in that understanding of the difference in diversity between Oregon and California, you can see why this became very interesting to me. So I went in and I looked at the ELA scores, and sure enough, the same was true in their math score. They were only superseded by Washington State. Quick fact, fun fact about Washington State, Seattle in particular. We had here in Columbus a pharmaceutical branch. I think it was out of Children's Hospital, I believe. And at one point in time, they were really ramping up their math and their STEM work around pharmaceuticals. And because Columbus, the pipeline to this particular pharmaceutical company was not keeping up, they moved their pharmaceutical company to Seattle, Washington. So Seattle, Washington has been very high in terms of STEM for a long time. And where it cost us money and dollars, when I saw that, and I saw, okay, now here is an urban area, an urban district that is keeping shoulder to shoulder with what I have already learned over just experience in the years to respect, which was the state of Washington and their seriousness about STEM. Hadley? So when I went and talked to them initially, and I did actually I've done 3 trips now to this district. The first trip was really just to kind of ask the questions. They did a presentation for our organization. And I wanted to ask them, you know, how did you do this? You know, how did you do this? This is an urban city. An urban district. It's not, it is not well known. It is not high socioeconomic, but I wasn't clear, you know, on what the district leaders were going to tell me. So the first 2 things that they said, we focused on non-academic barriers first. Before we even started thinking about what needed to be done for academics, we needed to focus on what were those barriers that were learning at their best capacity. The second thing we focused on was the health of the children that we were teaching, because we believe that, and it's part of their board motto, a healthy child is a child that's ready to learn. So when I heard that, I thought, wow, okay, this sort of feeds into one, non-academic barriers. What non-academic barriers are you talking about? If we're not talking about the actual content and the actual curriculum that students are being exposed to, or the pedagogy that students are being exposed to, what is it that you focused on? So I wanted to know first, and these were the guiding questions for the study. The second time I went back with my student, and the questions that we had were, what did administrators do to address these non-academic barriers? And then second, if what they did there, could that be used in other urban settings? In other words, was there anything in this district and the unique context of this district that was transferable to other district settings? So those were the 2 guiding questions, and that's where we started. Can you advance that, Hadley? Thank you. So as I mentioned to you before, I got very interested in this positive psychology. My major professor here was Wayne Hoy at the time, and his wife Anita was serving on my committee, and she was an ed psych person. And we had a really good working relationship, but also, you know, became friends over time. But she and Wayne actually introduced me to this positive psychology and thought, wouldn't it be cool if we were thinking about some of the challenges we faced in school through some of these lenses in positive psychology? So what a positive psychologist does is they look at what works well in organizations, possibly different circumstances and individuals, you know, how people thrive, how they flourish in different contexts. And I, as a former administrator and a researcher in administration, I really became very interested in what happens in the conditions of a building that help support students. This particular framework, Perma Framework, is a well-being framework. And the reason that I chose this framework was because if you remember from the 2 quotes that were shared with us in the previous slide, one of the things that the board had said is, we believe a healthy child is a child who is ready to learn. So I knew the district was concerned about health. There were some health issues in the district, and I'll get to those slides in a minute. So that I knew they were concerned about health, but also this whole notion of addressing the non-academic barriers. So the non-academic barriers, if we're not talking and focusing on academics, then we're talking about those other things that help students thrive and be well in schools. So this PERMA construct became the theoretical framework through which we analyzed all of our surveys and kind of the lens through which we wanted to look at the district. So these are the tenets of PERMA. I'm not going to go through all of those. but you can certainly screenshot that if you like. But this is what Perma is, and it's actually Marty Seligman, his construct, except for the H. The H came after Marty's Perma, P-E-R-M-A, and then H was the piece that focused on physical health, and that came a little bit later through Kern and Butler. They added that on in 2016. So this was an exploratory case study. I am a mixed methodologist, so I do both quant work and qualitative work, and I do tend to lean into case studies when I find something that seems extraordinarily interesting, like in the quant world, we would call it an outlier. And I want to know why that is an outlier. Why is it working, especially if it's working well? What's happening there? So that's what drove the study. Semi-structured interviews were used as a data collection source, and the participants included 11 administrators. There was, of course, the superintendent, there were 5 building principals, and then 5 executive directors. Now, when I say executive directors, they were not all affiliated with the school. A couple of those executive directors were actual community resource persons that had the title of executive director. So that's why we called them executive directors in the building as well. So the executive directors were not all district directors. Thank you. Hadley, you can move forward, please. Just very basically, this was the makeup of the building in terms of demographics. The student population you see on the left side, and then the faculty and staff ethnicity on the right side. So this was a very pluralistic district, largely Hispanic, Caucasian, Caucasian, non-Hispanic, Filipino, African-American, Asian, in that order fell in terms of percentage. 36% socioeconomically disadvantaged. Now you would say, well, that's not the kind of urban I know. I know urban like 97%. But the reality is this district was very small, and the place that we focused our attention was, and you'll see when I show you this map, was in those areas of disadvantagement. So just to give you a snapshot of what this district looked like. The faculty and staff makeup on the other side, you will also see 38% of the faculty and staff was also Hispanic. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that that reflects fully the population, but it certainly was enough Hispanic faculty and staff that students felt some identity with, even just upon entry. And that becomes important over time as we move forward. There were 45 schools. One thing to note about this district that I have to share, California does something a little bit differently, and it may matter when you think in context. This is an elementary school district. So that means the entire district is made up of only elementary schools. And in doing that, they're able to focus on the developmental phases just of those K through 3 at some point and the K through 5 at some point. But they can focus developmentally on what's best for that child. And they're not trying to do the whole breadth and span of K-12. Whether you like that or not, there's pros and cons to that, and I can see that in 2 different ways, but for this particular district, it's important to note as part of their context. There was dual language acquisition programs in all of the buildings. They were state-funded preschools in the buildings, and the student population, as I mentioned, and the faculty and staff reflected great diversity largely. Thank you. Hadley? When we did our analysis, the emergent themes that we found were that the participants, 1, enjoyed their work. That was the one thing that came out very profoundly, and I'll come back to that again because they talked about it having purpose and giving them a different purpose in their life. I think as educators, we hear that a lot. People are drawn to the field because they are compelled or called, or they feel a sense of purpose around what we do. That resonated very strongly in this district among the 11 participants that we had. They had positive perceptions of their families and the community. And by the way, I will say, many of the teachers, faculty, and staff lived in the community. So there was not this sense of disconnect. And what was said in a couple of the interviews, but one in particular that I remember, they said, when I live in the community, I know that I am enriching the citizen that I will live with next year or the year after. So they took an ownership of the population, and there wasn't a we and they sort of relationship that existed quite to the extent that we see it in a lot of urban settings. They understood that student success was a shared responsibility. They worked toward creating strong relationships with families, but also with community agencies, and that was directed in the ways that they could impact some of their work. And this number 5 was the one I was saying again with number 1, they enjoyed their work, but they also found it meaningful. That was the whole purpose thing I was talking to you about. They prioritized student attendance highly, and then they saw student attendance and student well-being as being strongly correlated with student achievement. So that was one of the questions we asked. And, you focused on well-being, so what does that have to do with achievement? And that's when they said, well, if they're not here and they're not well, I can't teach them. So one, we have to get them here, and then we have to make sure that they're in good shape when they're here so that they can concentrate and they can focus. And then the last thing is, this is again what I shared with you in the second quote, that they believed healthy students perform better in the classroom. So those were the 9 things that came out that I captured, we captured, and we took those 9 and then we started plugging in for this article some of the different ways that these were evidenced. So it's not just in their words, but some of the things that the administrators did that I wanted to share publicly so that some districts who may or may not look like this can take some of the things that they did away and see if it works in their district.
Just to let you know, we have about 15 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Hadley. So this is the health map and chart I want to share with you very quickly. So in 2010, they started collecting BMI data. And Hadley, if you can point your, yeah, thank you. What I want you to see on this map is that the legend, you can't make it out really well, but the red in the legend was obesity levels of over 30%. The orange was at 28, I think, percent. The yellow was at 20. The blue, the dark blue was at 15, and then below that, the light blue was less than that. So the goal was to target those red and orange areas in terms of focusing on what they called the barriers, which was some of the health issues, and found that these were the lowest socioeconomic areas that I was talking to you about earlier, that 36% fell in this area. So they focused on not just the curriculum in the building, but they also went out into the community to work with grocers, to talk to them. Of course, there's not a lot of fresh fruit grocers in the area. They talked to them about working with them on what they called a 5-3-2-1 plan, which was emphasizing 5 fruits and vegetables a day, you know, the whole nutrition piece. And the grocers put up signs in the grocery store to encourage patrons to walk around the store where all the fresh produce was first. They removed the candy from the register, even though many of them knew that they were not going to be, that was not going to be viewed very well by the people who supply for them. And they put baskets of fresh fruit so that when kids came in, they could actually grab and take, and it wasn't an issue, just old fruit that they were getting rid of before it went bad. With this focus change on a lot of these, and I don't have time to get into all of the things that they did, but you'll notice 6 years later on the map on my right, there is no red left. And while there is still some orange, the vast majority now is that light blue, not even the dark blue, but the light blue and the yellow. And so that was very exciting for me personally, because they're impacting things that really make a difference in a child's life long-term. If you can attack obesity and start getting them to think about health differently, you're doing things, you know, long-term. Not only that, but you're introducing some scientific and biological understandings at a very young age that would benefit them, even if they're, and possibly career interests into STEM or health or medicine or forward. Thank you, Hadley. So some of the things we highlighted, I just wanted to put your eyes on it. This, like I said, this will be coming out hopefully in the not too distant future. But one of the things they focused on was enhancing the visual and performing arts, because they knew that when they got parents here into the building around the arts, they had a captive audience. So the superintendent made sure that every student in the district played an instrument and or sang, everyone. So that when there was a performance night, I mean, this sounds manipulative, but it was pretty pretty brilliant, and I can't say that it's uniquely brilliant, we've done this before, that when students come to participate, you have a captive audience. So he would take the first 5-10 minutes to talk about the initiatives he was rolling out. And then, you know, the students would perform and the parents would be excited, and it would be a happy occasion, you know, where they can interact with one another, but also take away some information. They provided participation opportunities for parents, including allowing them to serve as liaisons. So they did sort of like the parent college, only they had what they called promotoras, which were the mothers who would come together, and then the superintendent could give them information, or the principals could give them information to carry back to the communities. I'm just not going to hit on all of this, but I'll try to see a few. They track student attendance. Oh, one thing I will say, one of their major businesses that was an employer for many of the parents in the district was Pfizer. So what the superintendent did was he went to Pfizer and he said, I'm going to roll out this attendance initiative and I need you to be on track with me on this. And so he went to the employers to help educate the parents on how important it was to have their children in school. He would tell you just a little bit about him. He would, in his first 2 years, when a student was absent, he had an in-time computer intranet system. So when a student was absent, he knew by 10 o'clock every morning what student was in their seat and what student was not. So he would, by noon, get in his truck at the time and he would go visit him. And he was making home visits very early on in the school year and early on in his time to establish relationships, yes, but also to find out where students were. And what he found was a lot of multi-generational families in situations where there was either a young child and the parent had to work, or an older person and the parent had to work, or appointments had to be made, and they were leaning on some of the children to take care of the care of others in the family. So it was not, and you'll see that's not really an academic barrier, but it certainly kept the child at home. So they figured out different ways to begin to address childcare issues, and then that's when he started working with a number of businesses and resource agencies to begin to figure out ways to have care for some of the seniors in the afternoon where they would be looked on or have a meal, and then making sure that every school provided at least a preschool, if not some nursery care for the younger children, so the parents could go to work and then the kids could be in school. Hadley? Okay, I'm just flip through these real quick, Hadley. I'm just showing you pictures and snapshots of some of the things we saw. Again, focusing on the arts. They were really big in showing all the achievements all over the place. The place was almost too crowded with just achievements and awards and all sorts of things. The vision of the district was made visible in every building, sometimes in every classroom. So there was just a real focus on what this is that we're doing together and collectively, and we're doing it for our children. Go on to the next one. This is the center site, is really what the mobile units look like. They would set up these mobile resource centers outside of 7 schools in 7 different areas. And those mobile centers service not only things that they needed for school when the schools made references like clothes or food, but people could enter those centers from outside and not have to go through the building for issues, including, I was there obviously during the first election, so they were trying to register voters at the time that I went in. They were offering bilingual services at the time that I went in. They were offering support group services for depression. Just a lot of things that were very specific to each one of these little locales. Special services can be offered through these resource centers to the public, as well as when a teacher made a referral, it went first out to that resource center if they needed food, if the family needed food, if the family needed clothing, anything that the family knew that the teacher was aware of. She did not have to go through and I say she, I shouldn't say that. They didn't have to go through the bureaucracy of figuring them out through social services when their services were right there available to them. Keep going, Alex. I know I'm over time. There we go. That's just kind of what it looked like inside. Keep going. Oh, and this was a day that they brought in clothing because some of the women were going on a interview. How do I describe this? A group interview. So they asked for clothing in the neighborhood, and people brought in clothing so the women could come and shop. That little book down in the bottom, Es difícil mujer, it means it's difficult being a woman. That was one of the women's support group books that they used for some of the parents and the older women. That actually started as a knitting group, and then they turned it into a book club. So, Adam? The night I happened to be there, they had this family resource center night, and then the next time I went back just to see the resource fair, which was held in a local park where all the local organizations could come and play games with the kids and engage them in what resources they had for families and community. Okay, that's it. Now, the important part, and the thing that I want to hone on, you can take that down, Hadley, if you want to. The thing that I want to focus on is that while this district really focused on a specific population, I wanted to know if some of these things could be transferred in other ways into other districts. Well, some of the things that were very clear were the need for the involvement in the community. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I teach school and community relations at OSU, and I always invite superintendents into that class. One, because the accelerated students really like hearing from professionals in the field. They're getting ready to start, in their profession. So recently we had Dr. Dixon in, and I was just sharing with her, some of the things about the needs for families since COVID. And she and I got into an interesting conversation. Hadley, how's my time? Like a minute?
You have about 4 minutes.
Okay, we got into an interesting conversation about how this looks post-COVID. And one thing she said is that she leaned very heavily into the community and the partnerships. They have 150 providers that are helping them, faith-based, all kinds of things, serve the breakfast lunch student programs and reporting to children. They got 20 districts of their own, 50,000 computers from business partners, and another 20,000 from the mayor and the city. So that's the kind of power you can leverage when you're working with the community and embracing the community and allowing them to embrace the needs of your building.